Montana Territory, 1877. The sun was just rising when the gunshots started. Tess Darnell dropped low behind a thicket of sagebrush, her breath caught in her throat. Her skirts were torn, hands scraped raw from the fall, and there was blood on her sleeve, though she was not sure if it was hers. The wagon was burning behind her. Her brother was gone, and the two men on horseback were still hunting her. She did not know where she was anymore. The trail had turned to rock, and the smoke from the wreckage had already begun to fade into the growing light. But she knew one thing: if she stopped, they would find her. A sharp crack echoed through the hills. Another shot. Too close. She pushed herself up and ran. The land sloped into a narrow gulch, and she stumbled down, gripping onto scrub roots and jagged stone. Her lungs burned. Her mind reeled. She had nothing left: no family, no money, no food. Only the name of the town her brother had promised they'd reach, Willow Creek. She never saw the man on horseback until he was almost on top of her. He rode in fast from the ridge, rifle drawn not at her but back toward the shape cresting the hill behind her. A single shot rang out. Then silence. The rider dismounted in one motion, boots crunching the dry gravel. He walked toward her slow, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. She backed away, shaking. "Do not touch me." "I am not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was low and steady. "You are safe now." She stared at him. He was tall, with wind-chapped skin and a rough-cut coat. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she could see they were green, sharp, watchful. "Who are you?" she asked. "Gabe Granger," he said. "Cowhand up near Mason Ridge. I saw the smoke." She looked past him at the ridge. The other rider, the one chasing her, lay slumped over his horse, unmoving. "I do not need your help," she said, though her legs were shaking. He stepped closer. "You are bleeding." "I do not care." He crouched down, not touching her, just eyeing the scrape on her leg. "You need a doctor." "I do not have money." "I did not ask for money." She looked at him hard. "Why help me?" He met her eyes then. "Because you are the only one I want to see tomorrow." The words hit her like thunder. She could not breathe for a moment. Everything in her life had been running, hiding, losing. No one had said words like that to her, not ever. "I do not know you," she said. "No," Gabe said. "But I want to." She did not answer. She just let herself fall to her knees in the dust, the weight too much now that she was not alone. He knelt beside her, not touching her, just waiting. Later, after he patched her leg with a strip of cloth and offered her a canteen, Gabe helped her onto his horse. She did not argue. She was too tired, too raw. She leaned against him as they rode, her head against his chest, and for the first time in days she let her eyes close. They rode for miles down the valley, the sun climbing higher, the land flattening into grass and creeks. He kept his arm around her waist, steady, warm. Willow Creek came into view by mid-morning, a scatter of buildings, a church steeple, a livery. He took her not to the sheriff, not to the saloon, but to a small cabin on the edge of town. "Mine," he said simply. He helped her down and led her inside. The place was clean, quiet. A tin stove, a table, one bed. He gave her the bed without a word and went to fetch water. When he returned, she was sitting on the edge, eyes wide and guarded. "I am not staying," she said. "I did not ask you to," Gabe said. "Just rest." "I do not trust you. You should not." Her brow furrowed. "Then why?" "I told you," he said, setting the water down. "You are the only one I want to see tomorrow." She stared at him, and for a long time neither of them spoke. By nightfall, the fever hit. The wound on her leg was worse than she thought. Gabe sat by her side through it, wiping her face with a damp cloth, holding her hand when she thrashed. She cried out once in sleep, calling for her brother. He never left the room. When she woke, weak but alive, the first thing she saw was his face. "You stayed," she whispered. "You were hurting." She sat up slowly. "I should go." "You can," he said. "But not today." She looked down at her leg, bandaged, clean. "You did all this?" He nodded. She turned to him. "I do not understand you." Gabe looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, like a wall lowering just enough to let her see past it. "I lost someone once," he said. "A long time ago. I could not help her. I will not stand by again." Tess swallowed. "I am not her." "No," he said. "You are you, and that is why I stayed." She felt something then. Not fear, not anger, something warmer, something that scared her more than either of those. She reached for his hand, he held it, quietly, without asking for anything more. They sat like that until the fire burned low, and for the first time in her life, Tess thought maybe she had been found. Tess sat on the cabin's front step 3 mornings later, her fingers curled lightly around a tin mug of broth. Her leg ached in a dull, pulsing way that reminded her she was no longer running. The wound was healing, though still stiff when she tried to stand. She hadn't asked Gabe for anything more than what he'd already given, but he kept bringing food, water, clean cloth. He didn't hover. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. A soft wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek. The air smelled of sun, warmed pine, and the faint tang of horses. She watched a crow circle once above the trees before vanishing west. Behind her, the door creaked open. "You're sitting straighter today," Gabe said as he came down the steps and crouched to check the bandage. "Color's better in your face. I'll walk by week's end. Don't rush it. You tear it open and you'll be laid up twice as long." She didn't argue. Instead, she looked past him to the shed where he kept the horse. "You don't have much here. Don't need much." Gabe reached for a tin of salve, worked it over her skin with a careful hand. "You planning to move on once you're steady?" "I haven't decided." He tied the cloth snug. "You got kin anywhere?" "No." She looked down at her hands. "Not anymore." He didn't respond right away, just sat beside her on the step, laying his hat on his knee. "My folks died in Missouri," he said after a moment. "Cholera took him. I was 12. She didn't look at him. "Is that why you came west, eventually? Worked freight lines for a few years." "Drove her out in Kansas. Got tired of sleeping in dirt and hearing men die for cattle that weren't theirs." She turned to him then. "This land, it's quiet. Does that ever feel like an ache?" He looked at the horizon. "Sometimes, but it's clean." She nodded once. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence was not heavy, just full. Later, Gabe saddled the horse and rode into town for supplies. Tess watched him go from the same step, her thoughts tight and circling. His presence was steady, but she didn't know what it meant yet, what he wanted, or what she did. She stood on her bad leg for the first time that afternoon, bracing herself on the doorframe. Pain lanced through her thigh, but she didn't cry out. She gritted her teeth, took another step. Inside the cabin, she found a folded shirt of his on the chair and a stack of books tucked beneath the stove, their bindings well worn. She touched the edge of one. "The Prairie Traveler." He returned before dusk. He didn't ask how far she walked, though he noticed the fresh sweat on her neck and the new limp in her step. "I brought flour, beans, and a tin of peaches," he said. "You ever cook over a stove like mine? I can manage." "You want to?" She eyed him carefully. "You asking me to stay?" "I'm saying there's room here, if you need it longer." She looked at the small table, the empty chair across from where she'd been sitting each night. "I don't want to owe anyone." "You already don't." She folded her arms. "And what if someone comes looking? Then I'll be here. You don't know what kind of men they were. I saw enough." She stepped toward him, slow. "You're not afraid of trouble?" "I've seen worse than trouble." Something in his eyes stopped her. She searched his face, finding not bravado but quiet knowing, the kind that came from surviving things no one ever spoke of. "I don't want pity," she said. "You won't get it from me." She looked at his hands, one still holding the tin of peaches. "You really meant what you said?" "About tomorrow?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She took the tin from him, their fingers brushed. "Then I'll cook," she said, "but only if you chop the wood." He smiled, not wide, just enough to light something in his face. "Fair bargain." That night, the cabin smelled of beans and cornbread. They ate by lamplight, the silence between them different now, less guarded, more aware. She watched him from across the table, the way his shoulders moved, the way he took his time chewing, the way he filled the space without demanding it. She found herself speaking first. "My brother's name was Ali. He was 23. He wanted to start a smithy in Bozeman." Gabe set his fork down. "What happened?" He trusted the wrong men. "We both did." He didn't press her further, just nodded once. When the meal was done, she washed the dishes while he swept the hearth. Neither of them brought up what would come next. But when they settled near the fire, her chair drawn close beside his, she let her hand rest on the armrest between them. He didn't move away, and for the first time in her life she wanted tomorrow to come. The air turned brittle with morning frost, though the sun had begun to climb. Tess stood just outside the cabin, leaning lightly on a walking stick Gabe had carved from a juniper branch. Her leg bore weight now, though she moved slow and careful, like someone relearning the shape of solid ground. She watched him in the corral, fitting a new bridle to the gelding. His movements were steady but deliberate, as if he knew she was watching and didn't want to startle her off. He hadn't asked why she'd risen so early or why she lingered outside instead of resting. When he finished, he walked to the fence and rested his arms on the top rail. "You ever ride before?" he asked. She looked down at the stick in her hand. "Twice, never well. I'm not offering a race. I'd fall off. I'd catch you." She glanced up. "You're awfully sure of that." "I don't say things I can't do." She studied him a moment longer. "Why do you live alone?" He didn't look away. "Some folks don't suit towns. I don't like feeling watched." "You weren't always alone, though." "No." She took a slow breath. "Did she leave?" He shook his head once. "She died." Tess's voice came quiet. "What was her name?" "June." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the stick. "You loved her." "I was young, thought I knew what that meant. Turns out I hadn't learned half of it until after." She didn't ask more. The silence between them wasn't hollow, it was something solid, like stone shaped by time. He stepped away from the fence and moved toward her with a quiet tread. "You hungry?" "Depends what's left." "Biscuits and cold ham." She arched a brow. "That's generous." "I aim to impress." She followed him inside, setting the stick by the door. He opened the bread tin, handed her a biscuit without comment. They ate leaning against opposite sides of the table, close enough to feel each other's presence, not close enough to touch. After a while, he folded his arms. "I think you should stay." She looked up from her biscuit. "You don't know what I've done." "I know what you've survived. That's not the same." "No," he said, "but it matters more." She set the biscuit down. "I've stolen food, lied to sheriffs. I've run from men who would have hung me if they caught me. You're not the only one who's run. You don't ask much, do you?" "I ask what I need to." She leaned on the table with both arms. "What do you need, then?" He met her gaze. "Someone who doesn't flinch when it gets quiet." "I'm not afraid of quiet." "I know." She pulled her shawl tighter. "I don't know how to belong anywhere." "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you just need a place to stop running." She turned toward the window. The trees outside were bare now, last of the yellow leaves scattered in clumps along the creek bank. "What would I do here?" "Anything you want." "I can't so. I don't read well. I'm not gentle." "I'm not asking for gentle." Her eyes moved back to him. "And if I get restless?" "I won't tie you down." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than a month. You've been here 15 days. She blinked. "You've been counting." He smiled faintly. "I notice things." Tess stood, favoring her leg only slightly. "I need something to do with my hands." "There's a shed out back. Needs mending." She paused. "You'd let me work on your shed?" "I'd be grateful for it." That afternoon, Tess pulled on a pair of worn gloves Gabe lent her and leaned into the task of fitting new slats to the shed wall. He stayed nearby, chopping firewood, saying little but always within earshot. When she dropped a hammer, he didn't move to retrieve it. He let her pick it up herself. When she misaligned a board, he pointed once, said, "That one's off," and let her figure the rest. By evening, her shoulders ached, but the wall stood sound. She dusted her palms, leaned against the side of the shed, and looked over at him. "I don't mind this kind of tired," she said. "No one does," he said, stacking the last of the wood. She stepped closer. "You've been kind to me, Gabe, I know. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything." She looked at him then, really looked. The way his jaw held tension even when he smiled. The way his eyes searched hers like he was waiting for something he didn't dare speak. "I'm not going back out there," she said. "Not yet," he nodded once. "You don't have to." "And if I stay longer," he stepped forward just enough for her to feel the warmth of him, "then I'll still be here tomorrow." She reached up, touched his collarbone lightly as if testing the shape of the moment. "I think," she whispered, I want to be seen by someone who doesn't want to fix me, just see me. Gabe leaned his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the cold dusk air. I see you, Tess. She closed her eyes and for the first time let herself believe it. The wind carried the faint sound of axe strikes from the grove behind the cabin. Tess stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring a pan of wild onions and salt pork. Her hands moved with a steadiness that hadn't been there weeks ago. The limp in her step had eased, though Gabe still watched her walk like he was measuring every shift in her weight. She spooned the food into 2 tin plates, set them on the table, and stepped outside. He was kneeling beneath a pine splitting kindling from a gnarled branch. His shirt was damp across the back, darkened with sweat despite the cold. When she called his name, he didn't look startled, just straightened, wiped his palms on his thighs, and met her eyes like he'd been expecting her. "Supper's ready," she said. "I'll wash up." She nodded, stepping aside so he could pass. He ducked inside and she remained on the porch, watching the light fade behind the ridge. The air smelled of bark and iron and the last of the wood smoke curling from the chimney. When she returned to the table, he was already seated, hands clean, hair damp where he'd run water through it. They ate without speaking for several minutes, the clink of cutlery the only sound between them. Gabe set his fork down and leaned back. "That shed wall's holding better than I expected. I used a double cross brace, saw it in a camp outside Fort Shaw. Their cook built it to keep wolves out. You been near Fort Shaw once?" Passed through withily. He traded a broken watch for a sack of cornmeal. Gabe nodded, eyes never leaving her. "You ever think about doing something with your hands, building things? I never thought I could stay still long enough. You're still now." She let that sit a moment. "Then I could mend the fence behind the corral. It's sagging near the west corner." I noticed. She stood, gathered their plates. "I don't need to be told I'm useful, just need to be let." He looked at her with something close to pride. "You don't wait for permission. No one ever gave me any." That night they sat outside as the stars came in. Gabe had pulled 2 crates to the porch, one for each of them, and brought out a flask of rye he poured into 2 tin cups. Tess took hers without comment, sipping slow, the burn settling deep in her chest. "You ever miss the road?" he asked, keeping his gaze on the stars. "I miss the not knowing. Feels strange to wake up in the same place twice. You afraid of what comes after the stillness?" "I don't know what comes after anything," she said. "Never let myself think that far." He turned toward her. "I do." She looked at him, cup paused at her lips. He didn't smile, just watched her as if he'd been holding something quiet for a long time and had finally found the right night to set it down. "I've thought about what it'd be like to build something that doesn't need fixing every season. Something steady. Someone steady." Her voice came soft. "And you think I could be that?" "I think you already are. You just don't know it yet." She didn't answer, just finished her drink and set the cup down slow beside her boot. "After a while," she said, "I used to dream about a place with a creek and a fence and no one telling me to move on." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Then stay." She looked at him fully, the porch lamp catching in his eyes. "I need to know you're not just filling space left by someone gone. You're not a shadow, Tess. You're the whole sun coming up again." She drew in a breath that shook a little. "Then yes," his brow furrowed. "Yes, I'll stay." He didn't reach for her, didn't speak. Just sat there, letting her words settle between them like earth after a long rain. Then, slow as dusk, she reached across the space between their crates and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that until the stars burned white above them, and neither of them felt alone anymore. The last snow fell in April, light and wet, melting almost as soon as it touched the ground. Tess stood on the edge of the cabin's porch, hands braced against the railing Gabe had reinforced with cedar posts, watching the flakes dissolve into the soil. Her boots were muddy from the pen. She'd just finished forking straw into the stall where their mare had foaled the week before. Inside, Gabe was bent over the work table, smoothing a length of leather with a bone tool. He looked up when she came in, not startled, just expectant. "She's eating again," Tess said, pulling off her gloves. Won't let me near the colt yet, but she's calmer. Good, he said, setting the tool down. You're good with her. She's stubborn, so are you. Tess hung her coat by the door. I was thinking about planting onions behind the shed. That patch gets sun most of the day. He wiped his hands on a cloth. We can clear it tomorrow. I'll bring up ash from the stove, work it into the soil. She leaned her hip against the table. I've never planted a garden. You don't have to know how. You just need to keep showing up. She glanced at him, her mouth curving. You always talk like a man who's waiting for things to grow. I waited for you. Tess didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. She held it there, palm to palm, the warmth of it grounding her like the land outside, quiet, firm, and finally hers. He ran his thumb along the inside of her wrist. You ever think about marrying? She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. You ask like it's something we might do tomorrow. I'd do it tomorrow if you asked. Her eyes lifted to his. I never thought I'd belong to anything but the road. You don't belong to anything, he said. But if you want to build something with me, I'll be here every day. Tess looked at his face, worn and steady, and felt the last of her wandering unhook from her ribs. She didn't need a preacher's words or a town's approval. She knew what she wanted. I want to build something with you, she said. That spring, they cleared the patch behind the shed and planted onions, beans, and sweet corn. Gabe added a second stall to the pen, and Tess built a gate from scrap wood and iron hinges they found in town. They traded for hens, cured meat, and seed potatoes. Their days filled with sweat and simple work, and their nights with quiet closeness, his hand at the small of her back, her head on his shoulder beneath the quilt she'd stitched from worn shirts and burlap sacks. No one came looking for her. The two men who'd chased them through those hills had no kin who came calling, no friends willing to stir dust over their graves. The past, for once, stayed buried. By June, the onions had taken root. The mare's colt, now strong on its legs, followed Tess through the pasture like a shadow. Gabe built a bench beneath the cottonwood tree, and some nights they sat there until the stars came out, bare feet in the grass, the world gone soft with summer. One morning, she woke with his arm around her waist and the sound of birdsong at the window. She turned toward him, brushed a bit of sawdust from his shoulder. I was thinking of building a shelf near the stove, she said. He opened one eye. For what? Spices. I traded for some yesterday. Sage, coriander, and something I couldn't name. He smiled into the pillow. You're nesting. I'm building, she said. That's different. They married under the cottonwood in late July, just the two of them and the wind whistling through the grass. No paper, no witness but the land. He wore his cleanest shirt. She wore a dress she'd sewn from unbleached muslin. She tied her hair back with a piece of ribbon she'd carried since she was 17. Afterward, they walked the fence line together, his hand never leaving hers. Years passed. She built a root cellar. He built a smokehouse. They traded work for lumber, chickens for sugar, and laughter for long, hard days. She learned to shoot better, and he learned to read more than cattle brands she taught him from the books he'd kept hidden under the stove, his finger trailing under each word like a promise. They never spoke of the road behind them. It was there always, like a scar, but no longer raw. In its place grew a life full of small, good things: warm bread, mended boots, a door that never locked. They were never rich. They were never idle, but they were steady, and they were together. And in every season, harvest, frost, thaw, bloom, they woke beside each other and chose to stay.